Welcome to Accelerate My Practice. So all the time I get phone calls and questions about what is going on in general. And lately the phone calls and questions I'm getting are what is going on in the world? What's the future of dentistry? What's going to happen? How is all this going to impact my practice? And part of the reason why there's so much confusion is because of everything we hear on the news. Well, instead of me telling you what we hear on the news, let's just play and see what we hear on the news. So let's hit play and hear what all the news headlines are from the past couple days.
Prices, the holiday travel chaos at airports, and the Kremlin breaking its silence on those captured Americans. First, those skyrocketing prices at the pump. President Biden saying today he's considering a federal gas tax holiday when he could decide how much you would save and will it be enough to make a difference. Also tonight, thousands of flights canceled over the long holiday weekend. What's causing it?
Nearly 3 decades, what it means for your credit cards, mortgage, and even student and car loans. Stocks jump after the Fed's bold move to fight inflation.
I'm not trying to induce a recession now.
Could interest rates continue to rise? Plus, President Biden bashes oil companies and their profits. America.
We begin this morning, though, with the battle between the Federal Reserve and inflation.
The central bank will decide later today whether to raise interest rates, hoping to cool off demand and ease inflation. Soaring prices for rent, gasoline, and just about everything in between are creating a tremendous amount of pain for Americans trying to make ends meet. Last week's inflation report was supposed to show that prices were starting to moderate. Instead, it highlighted that inflation is still elevated and only going higher. Now, that report triggered a sell-off on Wall Street, officially putting the S&P 500 in a bear market, which is characterized as a decline of 20% from its peak. Now, many are wondering what Fed Chair Jerome Powell will do next to try and tame inflation and get the markets back on track without throwing the economy into a recession. Caleb Silver, the editor-in-chief at Invest.
Much worse than what we expected. We were expecting a slowdown. That slowdown is much more pronounced now.
On this episode of Expert Answers, forecasting the future of the global economy amid multiple shocks. There was the COVID-19 pandemic, now there's the war in Ukraine. Both are continuing to hit economic growth. The latest data from the World Bank Group warns of the sharpest deceleration in economic activity in 80 years. So what's driving this? How bad could it get? And are we headed for this so-called stagflation? For answers to this and more, we turn to the World Bank's Prospects Group's director, Ayhan Kozad.
Now, it is absolutely safe to say that there is a whole lot that's going on, and there's a whole lot of people talking about a whole lot of things. The challenge becomes, how does that impact us? Now, what I didn't want to do is come here and do a whole piece that would become political, some sort of political fodder, because that is definitely not my gig. Instead, what I wanted to do is kind of bring to what do I see from an MBA numbers perspective. And what I plan to do is make a series out of this. So today's going to be just what is the looming issue? And then you're going to see subsequent videos about, okay, what do I do about this looming problem? And first I want to just get into the nitty gritty of what is driving all of this. And we know some of the obvious things like fuel prices. What's driving fuel prices though? And what's also driving some of the other inflation, because fuel prices will drive a ton of inflation. There's zero doubt about that. But, so we've got this weird combination of, as we saw in the news headline, that apparently all the oil companies are making massive, massive profits at our cost. Second to that, we've got this war, obviously, in the Ukraine that's driving some of this. And so we got fuel prices as a problem and a war. Can't deny that. But bigger than that, what we have taking place, it's really interesting here and even more terrifying, quite frankly. Not trying to be an alarmist because, news is not about informing anymore. News is about selling ratings. And I'm not trying to sell ratings. I'm trying to simply inform like the news once did. What's going to drive a whole lot of this to go sideways is going to be how the economy is not growing. In fact, it's contracting. And depending on what happens in the next month or two, perhaps we'll end up in a recession, which is a definition of how long the economy's been retracting. But the challenge with that is that if the federal budget doesn't stay in alignment with it, and the federal deficit grows, the cost of running this country is going to get out of control. And more importantly, as interest rates are being hiked up, the federal government is also hiking up interest rates on itself, and that's going to make things a whole lot more expensive. So I want to get into some of the numbers of this for a moment. This is going to geek out a little bit, so play along if you could. In 2021, the federal deficit was 12.4% of the GDP, or $2.8 trillion, while the real GDP was only 5.7%. So the challenge is that the federal debt grew at twice the rate of the GDP. Again, what's this matter to you? It's going to matter. Hang on. So the challenge is that now the government is about $30 trillion in debt, 24 trillion of which is held by the public in the form of bonds. And the challenge with these bonds is that they have different maturity rates. Some are short rates, a year. Some are much longer rates. And as the interest rates hike up, these bonds become a problem. The current reality right now is that 1 in every $10 spent by the federal government is spent on servicing debt. Said another way, this would be sort of the equivalent, if I go back to the GDP growing versus the federal deficit federal deficit growing and the GDP not growing, this would be kind of like me as the average employee going and getting a $5,000 or $10,000 raise and then celebrating with a $25,000 vacation. It doesn't make sense and it's not sustainable. So much like you, if you have a mortgage and you go and your mortgage or your credit card debt, let's say, that's a better example because it's a revolving debt. But if you have $10,000 of credit card debt currently and you take your current income, it's a sustainable ratio likely. But if all of a sudden your credit card debt grows to $50,000 and your income doesn't grow, that doesn't become sustainable, you will end up in bankruptcy. The federal government somehow thinks they can't, or so they've proven, even though they're $30 trillion in debt. So the way the government has survived in the past years is the GDP has grown fast enough to outpace the debt. Therefore, people keep buying our bonds because thus far we've been good on them. The challenge will be as these bonds change and as interest rates go up, it's predicted by the GAO, which is the Government Accountability Office, that in the very near future, 27% of federal spending will be just paying interest, which would make it larger than Social Security. Not sure where they're going to get that cash. Perhaps rob Social Security. Who knows? But whatever the case is, they've got to come up with a place to do it. So I bring all this up because this is a big piece of what is driving this inflation. And as we saw in one of those news headlines, we are losing about 10% of our income in the form of inflation right now. 8.6, I think, was the percentage they put up there. This particular article shows it at a different number, but wherever it is, it's 8 to 10%. That our real incomes are being robbed through higher costs. Meaning when you go grocery shopping, you go buy a car, you go buy whatever, your dollar doesn't go as far as it did a very short period of time ago. So why is this important to you in your dental office? Why am I trying to teach you macroeconomics and maybe not even doing a very good job of it? The reason why I'm trying to teach that is because if a recession is coming or if a depression is coming, whatever the definition of that is, it's going to make business harder in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of things that we can and should do to prepare our businesses so we aren't hurt as badly by it. Regardless of how well we run our businesses, if the global economy or the U.S. economy takes a big old poo, to some degree it's going to hurt our businesses. Can't do anything about it. For those of you that were practicing in 2008, we saw that, right? And that was just because of a real estate bust, which is coming again, likely. I realize real estate's been really, really hot, but with interest rates going up, that will cool it some. It'll still stay pretty warm though, because we have all of these millennials buying homes for the first time, and they're buying homes at a faster rate than baby boomers are dying, not to be rude to the baby boomers, but there's a supply problem. There's not enough homes for all the people wanting to buy them. Hence why all this construction has been going on for the past few years and why the real estate market has been so hot. So to some degree, it won't pop like it did in 2008, but it will certainly cool down. Now, what could cause it to pop is if the economy gets bad enough that companies start laying off employees and people don't have jobs and thus default on their mortgages. Perhaps there's another correction or pop coming. And I do believe that those sorts of things are reality that will be coming in some degree, whether horribly ugly or not horribly ugly. I don't know the answer, of course, and I don't know if I'm smart enough to go find the answer to it, as much as I tried to do research to bring stuff to you guys. The bottom line is interesting times are coming. Winter is coming. So I want to make sure that we do everything we can to prepare all of our clients to weather the storm as well as possible. And I know during COVID, we did a very successful job of that, to where, golly, I wish I could remember the stat. I should have looked up before I got on here, but 60 to 70% of our clients had their biggest year ever while taking 2 months off. And it was because of a lot of preparation that we did during the 2 months off to help them do well. And I'm sure some of you watching are those people who did well. So it's our job now, seeing this coming in the future, to be ready for it. In fact, to digress for one moment, one of the keys to long-term business success that I am constantly trying to teach people is the game of anticipation. Said another way, through a metaphor, if you go play video games with one of your kids, assuming you don't play video games all the time, and you play one of those shoot 'em up games, how well do you do against your kids? And my guess is not well at all. And the question I always like to ask people is, do you not do as well as your children because your thumbs are slower? And the answer is no. The reason why your children smoke you at video games is because they've played the video games so many times that they've memorized the patterns of where things take place and what happens. Therefore, they can anticipate, whereas you are reacting to what you see. So there's a great lesson in that, though, in business. The key to long-term success in business is the skill of anticipation, of seeing things coming. Now, I know I'm not Nostradamus here, sitting here going, hey, look at how brilliant I am that I can see this coming, because I think everybody can see it coming. The question is, are you doing anything about it? If you're not, it doesn't matter if you see it coming. You're just as foolish as the person who's sitting back waiting and doesn't see it coming because their head's in the sand. If you aren't preparing and planning, you're a little bit behind already. In fact, we've gotten a flood of phone calls just in the last week or two from former clients, some of you who might be watching this, saying, hey, I don't know if my partner, my associate, my family member who owns the dental office is really thinking ahead, or if they just think that they're 10 foot tall and bulletproof, and thus they don't have to worry about the coming winter. So I can tell you that's part of why I decided to do this. This is how good I am at anticipation. I actually decided to do this because I got enough phone calls from people saying, hey, what do I do? So I thought I better do my homework and bring it to you. So this episode is only going to be about why is there a problem. Upcoming episodes are going to be about what can we do. How can we plan? How can we prevent? How can we save for the rainy day? Insert whatever cheesy metaphor you want. But we all need to be thinking ahead about those things and what it is that we all need to do to prepare our businesses for what likely is going to be potentially a very long winter. I mean, if these numbers are true and the federal budget is burning 2 to 2.5 times of their budget on interest alone, it will be a fiscal Armageddon, just to give credit to the article I'm referencing here. It will be a fiscal Armageddon. And it's a good article if you want to go read it. Whatever the case is, plan now, plan aggressively, have a plan. And if you're not sure what your plan is, or you want a plan, stay tuned and we'll provide that for you in upcoming episodes. Appreciate your time so much. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you have a wonderful day.